He married a single mother to save her child, never knowing she was a billionaire in disguise. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, it is free, and it is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories filled with heart and hope. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The heat of late July pressed over the small seaside town like a thick blanket. Waves rolled against the pier, the air smelled faintly of salt and engine oil, and the only sound inside the dusty repair shop was the slow turn of a wrench. Ethan Miles wiped his forehead with the back of his hand and stared at the old pickup truck that refused to start. The man was 38, strong from years of labor, yet worn down by quiet exhaustion. His bills were stacked on the counter like a wall he could no longer climb. He had once dreamed of running a community garage where people could learn basic car repair for free. But dreams, he had learned, did not pay hospital fees or keep the lights on. His mother's medical treatments were overdue again. The bank had called that morning. His stomach twisted with the familiar mix of fear and resignation. That was when he heard the sound of heels on gravel, sharp, steady, out of place in a place like this. He looked up. A woman stood in the doorway, sunlight outlining her figure. She wore a simple cream dress, her hair tied back, eyes hidden behind dark sunglasses. Even from a distance, there was something about her, an air of calm urgency, like someone who had run out of time but not out of pride. "Mr. Miles," she asked softly, "I need your help. It is unusual." Ethan nodded, uncertain. "Ma'am, if it is about your car, I am booked solid till next week." "It is not about my car," she replied. She took off her glasses. Her eyes were clear, intelligent, and tired. "It is about my daughter." That word hit him differently. Ethan had a daughter once, Noelle, 8 years old now, living with her mother 2 states away. He had not seen her since Christmas. The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice. "My little girl needs surgery. The hospital will not proceed unless a legal guardian signs the release. Her father passed away, and my family's legal situation is complicated. I need a husband on paper, only for a few months. Someone with no record, no connections to the media, no ulterior motive. I can pay." Ethan blinked, certain he had misheard. "You want me to marry you?" "Legally, yes," she said. "You would not have to live with me, and you would be free to end it when it is done. I just need someone I can trust." For a moment, he almost laughed at the absurdity of it. Then he saw her hands trembling as she held the envelope. Inside were hospital forms, photographs, a little girl with pigtails lying in a hospital bed, smiling weakly at the camera. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Ma'am, that is not something people just do." "I know," she said quietly. "But sometimes doing what is right looks nothing like what makes sense." The fan overhead squeaked, pushing warm air across the room. Ethan looked at her again, this stranger, whose eyes carried both desperation and dignity. He could have said no. He should have. But the photo of the child kept flashing in his mind, and his own daughter's voice echoed faintly somewhere in the back of his head. "Daddy always helps people, right?" He placed the wrench down on the table, his voice steady but low. "All right, tell me what I have to do." The woman's shoulders loosened in relief. "My name is Lila," she said, offering a hand that trembled slightly. Lila Hart. Ethan shook it. Her grip was warm, decisive, not fragile at all. Outside, a seagull called above the shimmering sea, and somewhere deep inside him, something shifted, a quiet understanding that his life, as he knew it, had just taken a turn he could never reverse. As Lila left the shop, the afternoon light stretched long across the floor, falling on the stack of unpaid bills. For the first time in months, Ethan did not look at them with dread. Instead, he looked toward the open door, toward the sunlight, and whispered to himself, "Just a few months. What could possibly go wrong?" The waves outside answered with a soft crash against the shore, like the start of a story neither of them saw coming. The courthouse was smaller than Ethan expected. A pale brick building that looked almost sleepy under the midsummer Sunday. The ceiling fans turned lazily, and the air carried the smell of old paper and lemon polish. Beside him, Lila stood perfectly composed, her cream dress replaced by a navy suit. There was not a single trace of hesitation in her posture, though her fingers twisted the silver ring she had chosen for the occasion. The clerk glanced over the paperwork with mild surprise. "Quick ceremony, huh?" he said. Not many people come in wearing work boots. Ethan smiled awkwardly. It was kind of short notice. The judge, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, looked up from her desk. Do both of you understand that this marriage is legally binding under state law? Lila met Ethan's eyes, her expression unreadable. Yes, Your Honor. Ethan hesitated for only a heartbeat. Yes, ma'am. 10 minutes later, it was done. 2 signatures, 2 rings, and 1 line of vows that barely left his throat. The word wife felt foreign on his tongue, almost too heavy for a man who still carried the ashes of an old heartbreak. Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt and gasoline from the harbor. Lila handed him a small envelope. This is for the first payment, she said, her voice formal, almost distant. And this, she pulled out a set of keys, is for the house we will need to appear to share. It is on Willow Street, near the water. You can move in tomorrow morning. He blinked. We are living together? Just for a few weeks, she said. Until the hospital clears the paperwork and the board stops asking questions. They monitor everything. I cannot risk it looking like fraud. Ethan nodded slowly. Understood. That evening he drove to the small rental on Willow Street. The house sat close to the bay, white paint peeling at the edges, but the porch overlooked the most peaceful sunset he had seen in years. Inside, Lila had already unpacked a few boxes. Family photos were missing, yet children's books filled an entire shelf. On the kitchen counter sat a glass jar filled with seashells and handwritten notes. He pointed to it. What is this? Lila glanced over. They are promises. Whenever my daughter felt scared during treatment, we would write one thing we wanted to do when she got better. Beach picnics, paint a mural, plant sunflowers. We call it our summer jar. Ethan nodded quietly. Something about that jar so simple, so hopeful, made the room feel heavier and lighter at once. Over dinner, the silence was awkward but not cold. She asked about his work, his mother's health, his daughter. He answered honestly, though every word seemed to echo off the unfamiliar walls. In return, she told him small fragments about Mia's condition, about the endless hospital nights, about how the doctors kept asking for signatures she was not legally allowed to give. When the meal ended, Lila stood to clear the plates, but Ethan reached for them first. I can help, he said. You do not have to, she replied. I know, he said, rinsing the dishes, but it feels wrong not to. She studied him for a moment, then smiled just barely, but it was the first real smile he had seen on her face. Later that night, he lay awake on the small couch by the window, listening to the rhythm of waves hitting the shore. From the next room, he heard the faint sound of Lila talking softly to her daughter over the phone, her voice trembling between strength and love. Mommy will fix it, sweetheart, she whispered. Everything will be okay. He closed his eyes, realizing that beneath all the contracts and pretense, there was something deeply human about this arrangement, 2 people clinging to decency in a world that often rewarded the opposite. At dawn, sunlight spilled across the floorboards, painting the house in gold. Ethan rose, made coffee, and stood on the porch. The sea breeze smelled clean, almost forgiving. For the first time in years, he felt like life had handed him not another burden, but a fragile chance to do something that mattered. Behind him, Lila stepped out with her cup, barefoot, her hair loose and messy from sleep. She looked at him, surprised to find him smiling. Morning, he said. She hesitated, then nodded, almost shyly. Morning, Ethan. And as the waves broke gently against the rocks below, both of them understood, though neither would admit it yet, that the act they had begun out of necessity was already starting to feel strangely, dangerously real. The following week moved quietly, like a long exhale after a storm. The house on Willow Street began to change shape around them. It no longer looked like a space for strangers pretending to share a life, but something in between, a halfway world of soft routines and polite boundaries. Each morning, Ethan left early for the garage he had rented near the pier. Work came in slowly, tourists with overheated engines, locals with boats that refused to start. In the evenings, he returned to find Lila reading medical journals or checking her phone for updates from the hospital. The air between them was careful, filled with unsaid words. One Saturday afternoon, he came home carrying a small bucket of white paint. Thought the porch could use some color, he said. Lila looked up from her laptop. You mean some repair? Maybe both, he replied, setting the bucket down. It is easier to breathe when a place looks alive. Without answering, she tied her hair back and joined him. They worked side by side in silence, the rhythmic motion of brushes creating a quiet harmony. The sea breeze carried the scent of salt and lemon soap. A gull called in the distance. When the last board gleamed under the sunlight, Lila stepped back and exhaled. "It looks like a home now," she said softly. Ethan wiped his hands on a rag. Maybe that is all a home really needs, some attention and a reason to stay. That night they ate simple food on the porch. Sandwiches, lemonade, and the comfortable silence of people who no longer needed to pretend quite as hard. When Lila laughed at one of his dry jokes about tourists getting lost, the sound startled him. It was light, warm, and utterly unguarded. But the next morning, a knock at the door shattered that calm. A man in a gray suit stood outside, holding a folder. His tone was polite, but his words were sharp. "Mrs. Miles, I am from the hospital board. There have been questions about the legitimacy of your marriage. Some documents are inconsistent." Lila froze. "Inconsistent how?" The man's eyes moved to Ethan. "The financial background checks do not match the standard pattern for high-profile patients. The board needs reassurance that this arrangement is genuine." Ethan spoke before she could. "You think we faked it?" The official gave a tight smile. "We are simply verifying facts. The hospital cannot risk being associated with fraud." After he left, silence filled the room like smoke. Lila sank into the chair, her hands shaking. "They are watching everything, Ethan. One mistake and they will cancel Mia's surgery." He sat across from her, steady. "Then we make sure they believe it." Her eyes lifted. "You mean, pretend harder?" "No," he said. "I mean, live like it is real. Go places together, talk to people, show them what they want to see." For a moment she searched his face, as if trying to decide whether he was serious. Then slowly she nodded. "There is a charity dinner tomorrow night. They will expect us both there." The next evening, Ethan stood in front of the mirror, wearing a borrowed suit that fit him almost perfectly. Lila stepped out in a soft blue dress, the kind that caught light with every movement. For the first time since they met, he saw her not as a client, not as a stranger, but as someone impossibly poised and fragile at once. The dinner was held at the Seabrook Hotel, its terrace lined with string lights swaying in the breeze. Music drifted through the air. They walked in together, hand in hand. Every camera flash a reminder that their secret was hanging by a thread. "Just smile," she whispered under her breath. "They are looking for cracks." He did. When a guest approached and asked how they had met, Ethan said easily, "At the pier. She needed directions, and I gave the wrong one, so she had to come back." The table laughed. Lila glanced at him, surprised, then played along, adding, "He still insists it was fate." By the end of the evening, the tension had melted into something unexpected, a rhythm, a partnership that felt almost natural. On the drive home, the night air was cool and still. Lila rested her head against the window, exhaustion softening her voice. "They will believe us now," she murmured. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "That is not what matters anymore." She turned slightly. "Then what does?" He paused, the ocean glimmering to their left. "That maybe we are starting to believe it too." Neither spoke after that. The headlights cut through the darkness, leading them back toward the little white house that had begun, against every rule they had set, to feel like the beginning of something true. The weeks that followed carried the rhythm of summer, the long light, the slow evenings, the quiet tide of routine. Ethan and Lila had settled into an uneasy peace, the kind that grows between people who have learned to survive each other's silence. What had begun as a contract now felt like a strange sort of partnership, though neither dared to name it. The town started to notice them. Mrs. Harlow, who ran the bakery, began setting aside cinnamon rolls for the newlyweds. The mailman smiled knowingly each morning. Even the children by the pier waved and called them Mr. and Mrs. Miles. At first, Lila blushed and corrected them. Then, she stopped correcting altogether. One afternoon, Ethan returned from the garage to find Lila kneeling in the garden, her hands covered in soil. She was planting sunflowers, small, sturdy, and facing the sea. "Your daughter's favorites?" he asked. Lila looked up, brushing hair from her cheek. "Yes. She says they are brave because they never look down." He crouched beside her and began helping without a word. When the last seed was covered, she sat back on her heels, the sun on her face. For a moment, her guarded composure slipped away, revealing something gentler, a woman who had carried too much for too long. Inside the house, the jar of handwritten promises had grown fuller. Ethan added one secretly when Lila was not looking: "Teach Mia to ride a bike." That night, the sky broke open with summer rain. They sat by the window, lights off, listening to the rhythm of water on the roof. "Do you miss her?" she asked suddenly. "Every day," he said. "But her mother has remarried. I did not want to fight in court. Noelle deserves peace, not another battle." Lila nodded slowly. "You gave up what you love most for her peace. That is rare." He smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe it was cowardice dressed as kindness." She turned toward him. "No. Sometimes letting go is the bravest thing." The silence between them deepened, not empty, but alive. The rain slowed, turning into a soft drizzle. Somewhere in that quiet, something shifted. The next morning, a call from the hospital broke the calm. Lila hung up and exhaled in relief. "They have approved Mia's surgery," she said, tears gathering at the edge of her lashes. "It is scheduled for next month." Ethan grinned. "That is incredible, Lila." She smiled back, radiant for the first time since he had met her. "It would not have happened without you." Days later, they received an invitation to the hospital's charity gala formal event meant to honor benefactors and highlight upcoming patients. "It is good publicity," Lila explained. "They will expect us to attend as a couple." The night of the gala, Ethan wore the same borrowed suit, freshly pressed. Lila appeared in a silver gown that shimmered like moonlight. For a man who had spent most of his life under grease and engine smoke, she looked like something he could never touch. The ballroom was filled with laughter, champagne, and the rustle of expensive fabric. Ethan stayed close to her, the hum of conversation surrounding them. They met doctors, donors, and reporters. Every handshake was another test of their illusion. Yet when he rested a hand gently on the small of her back, it no longer felt like pretending. A woman from the hospital board approached, smiling too brightly. "Mrs. Miles, your story is quite touching. You must feel very lucky to have found such a devoted husband." Lila hesitated only a second before answering, "I am. More than I expected." Her hand found Ethan's. The gesture looked deliberate to the crowd, but to him, it felt instinctive, like gravity had finally remembered where it belonged. After the speeches ended, they stepped outside for air. The night was warm, the harbor lights flickering on the water. Lila leaned against the railing, her heels dangling from one hand. "You handled that well," Ethan said quietly. She smiled, still looking at the waves. "So did you. For someone who hates crowds, you even looked like you belonged there." He shrugged. "I just kept thinking of what my mother used to say, stand straight and speak less than you feel." Lila laughed softly. "I think you did both." They stood there, watching the reflection of the city in the water. For the first time, Ethan realized he did not feel like an outsider anymore. Somewhere between the signed paper and shared silence, this woman had become part of his world. Lila turned toward him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for helping me get this far." He met her gaze, steady and quiet. "You do not owe me thanks, Lila. You just remind me what doing the right thing feels like." For a moment, neither looked away. Then a passing breeze carried the scent of salt and rain, breaking the spell. They turned back toward the sea, two strangers, bound by a lie that was slowly, undeniably becoming true. A week after the gala, the photographs began to appear online. Smiling faces, champagne glasses, the shimmering reflection of chandeliers on silverware, and in the center, Ethan and Lila, hand in hand. The image spread fast, picked up by local papers with headlines that sounded more like gossip than news. "The Mechanic and the Heiress, an unexpected love story." At first, Lila ignored it. She had learned long ago that rumors come and go like tides. But one morning, she woke to find 3 missed calls from her family's attorney and a dozen messages marked urgent. The board of trustees from her late husband's company had seen the pictures. They demanded an explanation. Ethan found her pacing the porch, phone in hand, the sea wind tossing her hair. "They think I am trying to manipulate sympathy," she said, her voice tight. "They are accusing me of using this marriage to protect my shares." He frowned. "That is ridiculous. We did not plan for any of this. They do not care about truth, Ethan. They care about control." She turned toward him, her composure slipping. "If they proved this marriage was arranged, they could freeze my assets, even delay Mia's surgery." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then we show them that it was not arranged. We show them that it is real." Her eyes lifted, uncertain. "Real?" He nodded. "We spend time in public. Let them see that we live like a family. They want a show. We give them something honest." For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a faint, almost resigned smile, she whispered, "All right, So they began to build a new rhythm, no longer out of obligation but survival and perhaps something gentler. On weekends, Ethan drove Lila to the hospital, waiting while she read to Mia. He fixed her car when it refused to start, leaving small notes under the steering wheel that said things like "Drive safe, the world needs you." She returned the kindness in quiet ways. She replaced his worn-out boots with new ones, left fresh coffee by his workbench each morning, and began calling him by his first name in public without hesitation. The town noticed again, but this time their whispers carried warmth instead of doubt. People saw how she watched him when he laughed, how he reached instinctively for her hand when crossing the street. It was all pretend, yet it no longer felt that way. One Saturday, they visited the summer market by the boardwalk. The air smelled of popcorn and sea salt. A local band played an old love song under the shade of bright umbrellas. Lila stopped by a stall selling watercolor paintings and lifted a small canvas of sunflowers facing the ocean. "It looks like our garden," she said. Ethan nodded. "Then we should have it." She shook her head. "It is not about owning it. It is about remembering how it made you feel." He smiled, a slow, genuine smile. "You sound like my mother." Lila laughed, the sound catching him off guard. It was light and easy, and for that one moment, they were not pretending at all. Later that night, when they returned home, Lila found another slip of paper inside the summer jar. She unfolded it and read Ethan's handwriting. "Take Mia to the ocean and tell her it is okay to be brave." She closed her eyes and held the note against her heart. Something inside her began to ache, the kind of ache that comes when you realize how fragile the line between duty and affection has become. The next morning, she received another call. This time, it was not the board or the press. It was the hospital. The surgery date had been moved up unexpectedly due to an opening in the schedule. The doctor's voice was calm but firm. "We need the legal guardian present. That means your husband." When she hung up, she stood for a long time in the kitchen, staring at the sunlight spilling across the floor. Ethan entered, still half asleep, holding a cup of coffee. "Everything all right?" he asked. She looked at him, her throat tight with both fear and gratitude. "Yes," she said softly. "Everything is finally happening." And though she did not say it out loud, both of them knew that the illusion they had created to save a child was slowly turning into something neither of them had planned, for something painfully, beautifully real. The morning of the surgery arrived with pale sunlight creeping over the horizon. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and coffee, a mixture that somehow felt both comforting and terrifying. Ethan walked beside Lila down the long white corridor, their steps echoing softly. Neither spoke. Words felt too small for what hung in the air. Mia was already prepped, her small body swallowed by a hospital gown, her hair tied into two crooked braids. When she saw Lila, her face brightened. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. Lila sat on the edge of the bed, brushing the child's hair gently. "You are going to be so brave today, sweetheart." Ethan stood by the doorway, unsure whether to step closer. Then Mia looked up and smiled at him. "Hi, Mr. Ethan. Did you bring the shells?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch. "I did." "Remember what we said? Each one is for something good waiting after the surgery." Mia nodded, counting softly. "One for swimming, one for drawing, one for Mommy's stories." Lila's eyes shimmered. "And one for summer," she added quietly. When the nurse came to wheel Mia away, Lila's composure cracked. She clutched Ethan's arm as the bed rolled down the hallway. "She is all I have," she whispered. Ethan placed a steady hand over hers. "Then she has everything she needs." The waiting hours stretched endlessly. Lila paced the corridor, her heels clicking in nervous rhythm. Ethan sat beside her, watching the clock hands crawl forward. He wanted to tell her that everything would be fine, but he had learned that empty reassurance only deepened fear. So he stayed silent, offering presence instead of promises. After what felt like a lifetime, the surgeon emerged. His expression was calm, professional. "The operation was successful," he said. "She is resting now." Lila gasped, covering her mouth with both hands. Tears broke free, unrestrained. Ethan felt his chest loosen for the first time in days. "Thank you, doctor," he said quietly. When they entered the recovery room, Mia was asleep, a faint blush returning to her cheeks. Lila sat by her bedside, holding the child's small hand. "She made it," she whispered. Ethan nodded. She did. For a long time they stayed like that, two adults and one sleeping child surrounded by the quiet hum of machines. Then Lila turned to him, her voice trembling. You should not have had to carry all this with me. He shook his head. I chose to. And if I had to again, I would. Her gaze met his, full of exhaustion and something more dangerous trust. You say that as if you mean it. I do, he said simply. The next few days passed in a gentle blur. Ethan helped with paperwork, brought food, and fixed a leaking faucet in the hospital kitchen just to stay busy. Every evening, he and Lila would walk outside to the small courtyard garden. They did not talk about the future or about what their marriage was supposed to mean. They just sat together under the soft orange light, listening to the sound of crickets. One night, as the sky deepened into violet, Lila said quietly, "When this started, I thought I was buying your help. I did not realize I was finding something I had forgotten: peace." Ethan looked at her, the shadows softening her face. "Peace is not something money can buy," he said. "It is something people give each other." She smiled faintly. "You sound like someone who has lived through enough to know better." "Maybe I have," he said. A week later, when Mia was strong enough to go home, the three of them drove back to Willow Street. The house felt warmer, more alive. Sunlight poured across the porch where the sunflowers had begun to bloom. Mia's laughter filled the air as she ran between the flowers. Lila leaned against the railing, her voice soft. "She has not laughed like that in months." Ethan nodded, watching the child twirl in the light. "That sound is worth everything we went through." For a moment, Lila said nothing. Then she looked at him with an expression he could not read. "You keep saying we," she whispered, "even though this was supposed to be my fight." "Maybe it was never yours alone," he said. And as the wind swept through the garden, scattering petals across their feet, both of them knew the line between duty and love had already vanished quietly, beautifully, without asking permission. By the end of August, the sunflowers had grown taller than Mia, their yellow petals glowing like small suns above the fence. The house on Willow Street felt different now, filled with laughter, with the smell of coffee in the morning and music drifting from the radio in the afternoon. What began as a false marriage had quietly become a fragile kind of happiness. But peace rarely lasts long. One morning, Ethan walked into the garage to find a man in a dark suit waiting for him beside the tool bench. The man introduced himself as Nathan Cole, an investigator from the corporate board that managed Lila's late husband's company. He placed a folder on the counter, its corner stained with salt air. "Mr. Miles," the man began, his tone polite but cold. "You may want to hear this before we make it public. Our board received evidence that your marriage to Mrs. Hart was arranged to secure medical approval and protect her estate. There are payments from her personal account to yours, significant ones." Ethan stared at him. "Those were repayments for my mother's hospital bills," she insisted. The man raised an eyebrow. "Maybe so. But in the court of public opinion, motives matter more than details. You understand how this looks." When Ethan returned home, Lila was already on the porch, phone in hand, face pale. "They are going to release the story," she said. "They claim we staged everything, that you married me for money." He froze. "You know that is not true." "I do," she whispered. "But the world will not care." By nightfall, the first headlines appeared. "Marriage built on lies. The mechanic and the millionaire's widow." Paparazzi parked near the street. Neighbors turned curious. Even the bakery lady avoided their eyes. Inside the house, Lila sat at the kitchen table, her hands clasped tightly. "They have already contacted the hospital board," she said. "If they believe this story, they can revoke Mia's medical coverage retroactively. Everything we did could be undone." Ethan paced, frustration simmering under his calm voice. "Then we fight it. We tell them the truth." She looked up sharply. "And what is the truth, Ethan? That we started with a lie and somehow built something real? Who is going to believe that?" He stopped walking. "You should," he said quietly. "Because I do." The silence between them felt heavy. Finally, Lila rose, her voice trembling. "You should go before this gets worse. If they see us together, they will say it is for show." "I am not leaving," he said. "Please," she whispered. "Do this for Mia." Her words cut through him. He wanted to argue, to stay, to protect her, but the look in her eyes was not a request. It was a plea. Without another word, he grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The sea wind hit his face like a slap. The following days blurred into headlines and phone calls. Ethan returned to the garage, fixing cars by day and sleeping on the couch by night. Each evening, he drove past Willow Street but never stopped. The house glowed softly behind the garden fence, like a world he no longer belonged to. One night, he saw Lila on television. She stood behind a podium at a press conference, pale but composed. "I will not respond to rumors," she said clearly. "The man you are questioning gave up his reputation to save my family. Whatever you think of me, he deserves respect." Her words silenced the room, but the damage was already done. The next morning, someone spray-painted the garage door. "Gold digger's husband." Ethan scrubbed at the paint until his hands ached. When he finally stopped, he leaned against the wall, sweat and anger mixing on his face. He had done everything right, yet somehow lost everything anyway. That evening, a small envelope slid under his shop door. Inside was a note written in Lila's neat handwriting. "They will never understand what we tried to do, but I do, and I am sorry that my world hurt yours." There was no signature, only a pressed sunflower petal taped to the bottom. Ethan closed his eyes, holding the note against his chest. The street outside was quiet except for the distant crash of waves. For the first time since summer began, the air felt cold. He whispered into the stillness, "You do not have to be sorry, Lila. You just have to come home." But the wind carried his words away, scattering them into the dark, as if even the ocean itself could not promise that love, no matter how real, was enough to survive the truth. Autumn came early that year. The air over the coast turned crisp, and the days grew shorter. The headlines had faded, but the damage remained. Ethan kept to his garage, taking every repair job he could find. The work kept his hands busy, but it did nothing to quiet the ache that followed him everywhere. One morning he arrived to find a familiar voice behind him. "You still open early, I see." He turned, startled. Lila stood there in a simple sweater and jeans, her hair tied back, her eyes shadowed but steady. He froze. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," she said softly. "Mia's recovery is going well. She asks about you every day." He nodded, unsure what to say. "That is good news." She stepped closer, her voice trembling slightly. "I never wanted you to be caught in this storm. I thought leaving would protect you." Ethan set down the wrench, meeting her gaze. "Lila, you do not protect someone by erasing them." Her shoulders fell. "You are right, and that is why I am here." Before he could respond, a car pulled up outside. Two men stepped out, both in business suits. Lila turned to face them. "They are from the board," she whispered. "They have been following me. They want me to sign an agreement to forfeit my shares, to end all public scrutiny." Ethan's jaw tightened. "What happens if you refuse?" "They will reopen the investigation," she said quietly. "And this time they will come for you." He looked at her for a long moment. "Then let them come. The truth will not break us unless we let it." But she shook her head. "The truth already cost you everything, Ethan. I cannot let it take more." That afternoon, the town gathered for the annual Harbor Festival, a tradition meant to close the summer season. Booths lined the boardwalk, children ran with cotton candy, and a stage faced the water where speeches were given every year. Ethan did not plan to go, but when he saw Lila's car parked by the pier, something inside him told him this was not a coincidence. He found her on stage beside the mayor, holding a microphone, her hands trembling. Cameras flashed from the crowd. "I was told to stay silent," she began, her voice clear despite the wind. "But silence has only hurt the people who did nothing wrong. The man you call a fraud is the reason my daughter is alive. He did not marry me for money. He married me because I asked for help, and he said yes when no one else would." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Reporters scribbled notes. Lila continued, her voice gaining strength. "If anyone believes that kindness should be punished, then take everything I own. I will still stand by what we did." Ethan stood at the edge of the crowd, frozen. The sun caught her hair, and for a moment, he saw her the way he had on that first day, calm, defiant, and full of quiet fire. When she finished, the crowd applauded, unsure whether it was out of respect or relief. Lila stepped off the stage, walking straight toward him. "I had to say it," she whispered, "even if it ruins me." He looked at her for a long time. "You did not ruin anything. You just told the truth out loud." But before he could say more, the same two men from the board appeared again. One of them handed her a folder. "You are done, Mrs. Hart," he said. "The company has voted to remove you from the board permanently." Lila took the document without flinching. "Then it is settled," she said quietly. "Now leave us alone." They turned and walked away, their shoes echoing against the pier. When the noise faded, Ethan reached out and took her hand. "You lost everything," he said softly. She looked up at him, eyes bright with tears. "No, I did not. I kept my word." The crowd began to disperse, the evening sky glowing with orange light. As the first stars appeared, Lila leaned against him, her voice barely audible. I think that is the first time I have felt free. He smiled faintly. Freedom looks good on you. And as they stood there, hand in hand beneath the fading summer sky, the ocean rolled in slow and steady behind them, washing away, piece by piece, the lies that once bound them both. By the time September settled over the coast, the air had cooled and the last of the tourists had gone home. The town grew quiet again, wrapped in the soft rhythm of waves and wind. Willow Street looked almost the same as it had that first summer, except now the sunflowers along the fence had begun to bow their heavy heads. Ethan's garage reopened slowly. Locals who once whispered about the scandal began returning with their cars, some pretending they had never turned away. He did not hold grudges. He greeted everyone with the same steady calm. The noise of the engines, the smell of oil, the simple satisfaction of fixing what was broken, it all grounded him again. One afternoon, while he was adjusting a carburetor, the small bell above the door chimed. Lila stood there, holding a paper bag and wearing a soft smile. You forgot lunch again, she said. He laughed quietly. You remember that? I remember everything, she replied, setting the bag on the counter. Inside was his favorite sandwich, wrapped neatly in parchment, and a folded napkin with a note in her handwriting. For the man who reminded me that truth is still worth something. For a while they ate together in comfortable silence. Then she said, Mia's doing better every day. She wants to go back to school next month. That is wonderful, he said. She is stronger than most grown-ups I know. She got that from you, Lila said softly. You never gave up, even when I told you to. He looked at her, the afternoon light catching her eyes. You are the one who stood up for both of us. You are the reason we are still standing. Lila hesitated, then reached into her bag again. She pulled out a thin envelope and handed it to him. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a marriage annulment form. It was unsigned. I thought I would bring this, she said quietly. The contract ended the day Mia's surgery succeeded. I wanted you to decide what happens next. Ethan studied the paper for a long moment, then set it gently on the workbench. I think we already decided, he said. Her breath caught. Ethan. He stepped closer, wiping his hands on a rag. That paper was for a deal between two strangers, but we are not strangers anymore. She smiled, tears glinting. Then what are we? He took her hands. Something real. Something we do not need to hide behind signatures. That evening, they returned to the house on Willow Street. Mia waited on the porch, a sunflower tucked behind her ear, holding a drawing in both hands. Look, she said proudly, showing them the picture of three people standing by the sea, sunlight painted above them. Underneath, in uneven letters, she had written, Our family. Lila knelt, tears slipping down her cheeks as she hugged her daughter. Ethan stood behind them, watching the waves shimmer in the distance. Later, when Mia had gone inside, Lila turned toward him, her voice soft. Do you think we deserve this kind of peace? He smiled. After everything we have been through, I think we earned it. The wind carried the scent of salt and blooming flowers. The last rays of sunset stretched across the porch, lighting the edges of the world in gold. Lila reached for his hand. Then let us not waste another moment pretending. Ethan leaned down, pressing his forehead against hers. No more pretending, he whispered. Only living. And as the evening melted into twilight, they stood together by the garden, no contracts, no secrets, no lies. Only love that had grown from the wreckage, as steady and luminous as the summer that had brought them together.